Well, good morning, folks. This is going to be a great Leading Your Best Life. I'm with Bryn Edwards. I've met Bryn through our pod squad, and Bryn's got a fantastic background in the area of psychology, organisational psychology, and that's what got us talking. So that's why he's here. Bryn, thank you so much for being on Leading Your Best Life.
Thank you very much, Lee, for inviting me on your podcast.
Mate, as I say to people, I can hear an accent there, Bryn. So In the first instance, before we start delving down into organisational psychology and psychology in general, and I know the area of wisdom and leading your best life is something that you've been helping people with for many years. Let's start with the Bryn Edwards story. Where have you come from and what's got you into this area of psychology and even people and organisational psychology?
Yeah. So, you picked up on my accent. I'm originally from England.
Mm-hmm.
I moved to Australia 14 years ago, to Western Australia specifically. How did we get to where we got to? That could be 3 hours, but we'll keep it down to a few key data points, which I think will probably become more useful as we dive further into this conversation. So, born in England, I spent 11 years at an English boys boarding school from the age of 8 to 18. The reason why I'll bring that up is because we'll probably talk about that later, because that's where I almost sort of experienced the organizing dynamics of groups and individuals quite early in my life. And, I had to understand those quite quickly, because if you didn't, there was consequence.
Mm-hmm.
From that, I went and did a degree in psychology, mainly because I thought it would be interesting. I wanted to do something different to what I'd studied at school, and there was a bit of a deeper pull in there. I went successfully, did that degree, got a good 2-1 upper second class degree. But I found if I'm honest, I found the experience a bit underwhelming. But I couldn't quite articulate why. I spent a couple of years after that traveling, working in motorsports events around the world, living quite a fun lifestyle, and then went back 3 years later to do a master's degree in organizational psychology. And the reason this is where I started to further understand what the pull was to psychology, but why I found the degree underwhelming. The degree was very much about the top and bottom 5%, people who need quite significant clinical help. And I was more interested in the middle 80, 90. And it's easy for me to look back now and point straight at it. But at the time, there is no studying of human functioning and human psychology. What does good look like? What does healthy look like? It all tends to be around what does not good look like, and pathology focused. And the only thing that was sort of anywhere close to normal everyday functioning at that time from a master's degree perspective was either sports psychology or organizational psychology. And really, sport was quite narrow for my liking. Sport's great and we can learn a lot from it, but it is a very confined environment, controlled environment. And so, its applicability to life and business, I think, sometimes is dramatically overstated. So I went towards organizational psychology because that's where most people are hanging out, aren't they?
Mm-hmm.
That's what they're doing with the bulk of their time while they're awake. And not in their houses. So I did that again. It was interesting. There was stuff I learned that very much at that time. We're talking 2000, 2001. I was lectured by the world's leading expert in workplace stress. And this fascinated me, this idea that spaces can cause damage and environments can cause damage. Particularly having been at a boys' boarding school. And I wanted to pursue that afterwards, but it didn't really go anywhere at that time. It was really quite early. So I could have embarked upon a path of, becoming an out-and-out organizational psychologist, but that seemed, again, quite narrow to me. So I went out into the world of, I started off doing a bit of sort of corporate training and coaching, but from there, more into management consulting for 15 years. So managing, large scale transformation projects at places like London Underground, Nottingham City Council, Rolls-Royce, and then moving over to Australia here and working with places like Accenture and Chevron and stuff like that. And during that time, what I found was that we kept going round in circles. And I would find myself often sitting in the presence of key decision makers who were considering, rigorous, data-driven ways forwards based on the best practice. And I'd sit there and intuitively, deep down, I'd sit there and think, yeah, this will probably work for 2 or 3 months, and then it'll plateau. And then probably in 12 months, we'll be in a worse place than we are now.
Mm.
But it's difficult to articulate. And it was tricky as well because those cycle times were anywhere between 12 and 18 months. And I was lucky to work on projects where I saw that. And, you start out your career and there's a lot of clever people around you and you think that they know better, so you trust them. And then you get to 12, 18 months time and you're like, it's not quite got to where I thought it would. So I moved through that and moved through that and moved through that. And then I think whilst my career was doing this, in my life, throughout this, I'd done what I'd followed the path that was sold to me at school. Do well, go to university. Once you're at university, you'll get a good job, which I did, and then you find someone, settle down, have family, da 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 da. All right, and so I was doing all of that. And then when it got to about the age of latter 30s, all the wheels started to come off. And I found my relationship with my daughter's mother imploded. Few years, about 18 months after that, I got to a point where, I was doing some in-house consultancy work at Chevron and the barrel price dropped and there was large swathes of people that were made redundant in 2015. And I got caught in the last wave in the end of 2015. And that was just it. Deep down, I knew this is it for what you're doing and how you're working. And so, there was a large amount of upheaval in my life whereby, on one scale as a consultant, I'm looking outside and intuitively knowing that there are patterns and cycles to things that are playing out repeatedly, but they're difficult to articulate, but they're actually occurring. And then all of a sudden, around about that 40 mark, they're happening within my own life to me. And I got to a very clear and deep sense of having to acknowledge to myself that really, for all the knowledge, for all the books, for all the stuff that I was holding in my head that I thought helped me to navigate life, it didn't. And so I was faced with this very existential crisis of being able to acknowledge and admit to myself that I didn't know who I was or how I worked.
Mm. Wow, that is an existential crisis, as you say.
Yeah.
Who am I? How do I work? Yeah.
Yeah. And if we're honest, most people do not know who they are or how they work. Right. You might know, and COVID was a really good example of this, right? We know ourselves by the external things that we anchor ourselves to, and we know ourselves through our doing, So I might know myself because, I'm a bank manager or an accountant or something. I know myself by the restaurants I go to. I know myself by the films I see, the restaurants I go to, like I said, the people I hang out with, the things I drink, the things I do, the exercise classes I go to. And then when they were all shut down, there were a lot of people around who struggled with that. Because it's like, well, now you're left with who you are without all that stuff. And most people don't know who that is. How do you know yourself through your being, not your doing? Right. And then how do you work? We are emotional, we are rational, we are behavioral, we have beliefs, we have a core nature. how do they all work? And so from that point on, it was kind of time for me to take most of what I knew and, yes, I have these letters after my name, but I'd take most of what I knew, what I do, this, that, and the other, and just chuck it in the bin and start from scratch.
Mm.
And one of the things I did was I did the WA Real podcast, which was first thing I wanted to know was do these patterns and things flow to other people? I had this deep sense of here's Bryn and he's gone so far away from who he should be. And these relationship implosion and career implosions were bringing me back. And so I for 4 years, I spoke to everybody and anybody in a long form conversation and just let them talk. And I just kept listening and listening and listening. And, really a lot of people thought that podcast between 2017 and 2021, 200 odd conversations. A lot of people thought that was, me building a network and doing the thing, which it was on one level, but really it was that longitudinal study into the meta patterns that influence our life and how we actually function as living human entities. And I learned a huge amount from that. And then then towards the end of that delivered me to an interview with a lady called Rosalind Snyder, who was the first person ever to say, what's this podcast really, really, really about, Bryn? And I said, there are patterns, Ros. And she said, tell me what you see. And I told her, and her response was, you're nearly there.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, what do you mean I'm nearly there? It means you're holding something that I've been looking for, and I wasn't finding in any university. And so we did a podcast, which you can still listen to today. It's a 2.5 hour bonanza. And after that, I embarked on a mentorship with her. She's developed something called realm theory, which is it's the meta pattern of life. It's the universal principles that apply to all of us as human beings, individually and collectively. And it didn't take me long to look into that and suddenly go, wow, this starts to explain all the issues I was seeing as a management consultant. This starts to explain many of the issues and surprises that I found in my own life. This starts to explain a lot of things. And it also explains why I wasn't finding what I wanted at university as well.
You just call it round theory. What was it called?
Realm theory, REALM.
Realm theory. Okay.
Yeah. And so from that, it gives us a comprehensive and integrated framework for understanding our psychology. And when we understand how we work, then it becomes more straightforward to sort things out, whether that's on an individual basis. So we sort of refer to it here as cultural psychology. So, we work right at the intersection of organizational culture, team performance, and individual sort of resilience or mental health. And so, because they all impact one another, what goes on within me, between me, and around me. There's three things going on all at the same time, all the time. And so, we can have individual clients that want to come here to clean stuff up in their life because everything else they've tried hasn't worked. We can have teams that come here they want to function. And last year we did some really great work with some organizations actually cleaning up their culture.
Cleaning up culture sounds very interesting. Let me go to
tons in there. Where do you want to
go? Well, your LinkedIn page as a starting point when you start to talk about these things. So there it is. It's a cleaning up culture, and I literally came across that realm theory. There it is. There, the pattern of life realm theory. There you are with Ros and Snot. Yeah, with Ros. So where is she based? Where is Ros based?
We're based here. I'm talking to you from our office here in Myree.
Oh, in Myree. Yep.
Yep. Just here on McCoy Street.
Okay.
So, yeah, not far from.
Fantastic. So you and Roz are now working together. Is that what happened?
Yep. And there's a couple of others as well. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. So if we're going to talk a little bit about this, the realm theory, you touched on it just a second ago, something about within me, around me, and what was the other piece you talked about?
Surrounding me.
Surrounding me. So
Yeah.
within me.
Yeah. So there's what's going right. So let's take you and me.
Yeah.
You know, we've known each other for a little time now.
Yeah.
So there's what goes on, you know. So it's almost like, you know, if you imagine one stick person with a circle around them, right?
Mm.
And that's me. And there's things that go on within me, right? And then outside of me is you, right? And you're like a stick person with a circle around you. And because we've got to know each other, you know, those circles overlap, right? So there's my inside and there's my outside. But then there's the space in between that, the space that surrounds us. Okay. So the way to best describe that is, so because we've hung out a few more times, right? We start to form a relationship, and it's the relationship that surrounds us. Okay. And what we have to remember is that the relationship is an entity in and of its own right.
Mm.
Okay. So as long as we put a penny in that pot, so to speak, and keep it healthy and clean between us, okay, then that will always be there. You know, that will always be there. You know, if you're having a bad day or I'm having a bad day, you know, there'll be a level of trust in it. Will be, you know, if you say something that's a bit out of turn, I'm like, oh, I'm not quick to just get rid of you. I'm like, oh, you know, Lee's having a bad day or something like that. And the relationship as a whole, because the relationship is bigger than the two of us, right?
Mm. Mm.
And so it's keeping that clean, because if we don't, then that's when sort of negative dynamics can start to take hold within that relationship. Now, if
Mm.
you blow up you and me, right, to 20, 40, 50, 60, 100 people like you would in a
Mm.
company, the
Mm.
culture is what surrounds everybody.
Mm. Mm.
And that is an entity in and of its own right, much like an individual has many layers where we've picked up patterns that we've needed to along the way to get through some of the dramas and crisis and trauma and whatever we've had through our life. And we need to clean those patterns up, which is a big part of what we do here at Wisdom in Your Life. So too do we have to do the same thing for these spaces that surround us, which is how we clean up culture in an organization.
Well, let's talk about this. You've used the term cleaning it up, cleaning up. Let's talk about, in the first instance, let's talk about in terms of, let's just say, a relationship. Could be, say, you and I. What would be something, examples of what might make that dirty, if you're talking about, or not clean? What might be some things that would happen to make
Well,
it
I'll tell
not
you what,
clean?
let's go back to my time at English boys boarding school.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, as you can imagine, at an English boys boarding school, it's very English, stiff British upper lip, right? People used to think that a boys boarding school would be full of fights, right? But it wasn't, because if you got into a fight, you'd lost, because somebody had arced you up enough that you'd started to throw a fist, right? That was the game, that was the sport, that was the rules, that's what was going on. And while we were at boarding school, like, you know, nobody wanted to be there. Everyone wanted to be at home. They'd rather be in their bedroom with their brother, their sister, monging out, watching TV, having home cooked meals, being in the, you know, the love of mum and dad. Everybody was homesick. Everybody really wanted to cry, but you couldn't,
Mm.
right? Because if you did, it was weakness. So everything was suppressed, right?
Mm.
Everything was pressed down, right? But the game was, how can you just walk around like tip on everybody's shields and see if you can find a crack, right? And so that's the dynamic that was going on. And what I soon started to notice, because you didn't want to be the focus of attention, right? Because if you did, it was either emotional abuse or then it ended up being like physical roughhousing, right? And I didn't really want to be that focus of attention. So I started to look at things more upstream of how do you end up at that place. And what I started to notice was if one boy spoke to another boy in a certain way, like to directly try and goad them and piss them off, right? Because the culture, right, was suppressing what the true response, the true feeling of the recipient of that, right? They kept it like stack and locked down. But here's the thing, that true response, that true feeling, it doesn't go anywhere, right? You might put it in a box, suppress it, push it down and get really good at that. But it actually goes nowhere. And so what would happen would be is that true response to that interaction would sit and fester, right? And it may go around the group, right? But after 2 or 3 weeks, it would come back to its original creator and recipient, right? And those two would probably end up having a fight, right? And that was the way that the charge was discharged.
Yes.
A charge was created, right? Because we're all emotional beings, right? All this whole thing of, oh, are you rational or are you emotional? No, you're both, right? If you think you're one over the other, there's an imbalance, and that's not healthy. You know, we get a lot of people today talking about overthinking and can't control their thoughts and da 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 da. And I'd invite people to reframe that to most overthinkers are probably underfeelers. Because
Yeah.
if you're not doing enough feeling, and that, you know, our feeling sits at a much deeper level and it shades and colors our thinking. But because we like to isolate and cut things apart and see things as individual pieces, we don't connect the dots of how we actually function and work. So most overthinkers are actual underfeelers. So we go back to boarding school, right? So there's this interaction, creates a charge, it was suppressed, but then it comes back because it goes nowhere and it gets discharged, right? It gets discharged in a fight, right? These were the dynamics that I was struggling with as a management consultant. Because having got used to understanding how this intuitively worked, you start to see how, right, we're going to make a rational decision that's going to change the job functioning of probably, let's arbitrarily say, 200 people in a division. Nobody wants their job to change. Everybody, you know, most people just want to go to work, do the thing, enjoy it as much as they can. You know, most people are doing some level of emotional reconciliation within to reconcile the fact that they're spending a large amount of time doing something primarily for money, right? So we've got to be honest, right? And that's the beauty of this. You know, when people say I'm passionate about my job, generally what they mean is they're passionate about earning tokens to pay the mortgage, have food, put electricity on, right? That's the blunt truth. So you have these and anybody who disagrees with that, I usually say, if you won the lottery tonight and won 10 million, would you be here at work tomorrow? Most people say no. It's like, well, there you go. So you'll have managers who make a decision and then that changes something for like 200 people. 200 people will have an emotional response to that, right? But nobody wants to be the person who goes, oh, this is a bag of shit, or this isn't working, or this, that, and the other. So just like in the boarding school scenario, instead of it being one boy and one boy, it'll be one group, 200 people, all that true feeling, true charge, suppressed. But where does it go? It goes into them or it goes out into the surrounding space, that relationship surrounding culture, right? But it's 200 people. So that's a lot of junk in the environment, right? And we're all really good nowadays at knowing that if we're driving down the road and we're eating a Snickers bar, we don't wind down the window and throw the wrapper out the window, right? Because we're all good at keeping the physical commons clean. But when it comes to this deeper, you know, emotional commons or cultural commons, oh, we just chuck junk out left, right, and center and think that it'll all sort itself out, right? So you have 200 emotional responses. They will just sit there and fester, and then they'll start to all come together almost like a destructive whirlpool. And then that starts to shape the culture, the space that's in between. And one individual versus a culture that's like a circle this big has no chance, because the surrounding culture has a much greater influence on us than we ever imagine.
Mm.
So all this idea of let's just look at the individual by itself is folly. It's important that we understand what are our own dynamics, what are our own destructive patterns. And that's a key part of what we do here at Wisdom in Your Life, is we have to get people to understand what's my destructive pattern and what's not mine, so I can discern what's mine and what's not mine if we're going to take a step further and clean up the cultural surrounds around us, right?
Mm.
So the same things that we use to help people to clean up their own individual patterns, this is what we do with it with organizations, is we then take them on as a little collective to then go and do the same things to clean up the destructive patterns that get lodged in a culture. And we've all experienced it. You're in an organization and you see somebody come in and they're bright and shiny and new and dripping with enthusiasm and thrust, and then you're like, within 2 to 3 months, they're as cynical as everybody else.
Mm.
Well,
Mm.
because the
Mm.
surrounding culture needs to be attended to.
Mm. Mm.
And,
Mm.
that influence, right? That influence is so important from a managerial and leadership level, because that is your quickest and most cost-effective point of leverage if you want to bring about a change in an organization. You can send everybody off on behavioral change courses and stuff like that and spend fortunes, but your impact will be quite low and it will take a long time for that to embed. If you actually remove some of the patterns. So what do some of the patterns look like? They can be, in grouping and out grouping, right? Oh, it's them lot. It's them lot. We do a
Mm.
very simple little cultural audit with organizations, right? It takes probably 3 to 4 minutes for people to fill out. And what comes up pretty often is that there's this in group and out grouping.
Mm.
There's another group that has
But,
more influence than I do. Yeah, when you go on the ground and talk to people and say, which is the other group? No one can tell you,
mm.
because it's a dynamic that's stuck in the culture, right? And you see this, you see this playing out in places like, the UK and America. We have in group and out group. We do it with migrants. Oh,
Mm.
it's them coming in. They're the ones that are, shagging up the economy and stuff like that. No, what's going on is there's a whole stack of people who know that things are not working the way that they should. There's huge, this is a whole other trajectory and we won't go into it, but there is a huge inequality in how wealth is distributed.
Mm.
So that is an in-group and out-group. Yeah, it's manifesting itself through, it's migrants and non-migrants and stuff
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah.
these dynamics play out. There's also there's other ones where we can instill too much internal competition. That starts to occur. We can see stuff where people start to minimize things. So when shitty things happen, it's like, oh no, it's all right.
Mm. Mm.
It's like, no, this is not
Mm.
right. And then we
Mm.
understand, and the thing is, a lot of what I talk about is we all know it deep down, right? In our deepest place of knowing, we all know this stuff. I'm probably better now at being able to articulate it. And by doing that, it brings it up to a conscious level for everybody else. And so yeah, it's look, for me, it's a super fascinating place to be working,
Mm.
because
You remind me, of course, Peter Drucker saying, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And that's what you're talking about there is you have all this rational
oh yeah,
thinking, spreadsheets, structures,
yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
all this invisible suppressed charge, the
Yes.
them and us, the unspoken.
Yeah,
Uh,
because like the true nature of individuals and collectives of individuals doesn't give a shit about your business plan, right?
mm,
One of your questions that you put down on the the list of questions to ask is, what's one of the things that like leaders and managers are not getting, not helping them. If we start at the top, it's all of an individual is showing up to work, whether you like it or not. This idea that they wipe their feet of their drama before they walk through the door, and then that drama doesn't come through the door, is just complete folly, right? And that drama might not be someone and their spouse having an argument that morning. That drama can also be something that happened in childhood and has shaped the patterns of how we do life now, right? The patterns that are not their own patterns, not from their own nature, place, purpose. And so, you have all of the individual shows up. There's more going on than just this rational behavioral level. There's an emotional level, there's a belief level, and there's a core nature level that are going on, right? And when people come together, we have to remember that a business ultimately is just an arbitrary collective of people centered around a thing in the middle. Now, it is a living entity in and of its own right. And I think that's another key point is I started to understand organizations as a management consultant far better when I started to see them as living entities. They move through time and space, they learn, contract, expand, depending on their nature. So the same principles that apply to me apply to an organization, and it applies to groups of people, right? And there's going to be a formal network and there's going to be an informal network, and there is so much more going on in the unseen commons than there is in the seen commons. And to deny any of that is absolute folly. And the business leaders that are coming to us now are almost at their wits' end. And it's similar with individuals, but they're almost at their wits' end of, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've read this book, I've read that book, I've tried this, or management consultancy is, Bryn of old type people have suggested this and suggested that, but we just keep going round in circles.
So let's just look at that for a second. What is it that, what are the mistakes that those leaders are making, or what knowledge is it they don't have, or what behaviors don't they have that they've tried and it hasn't worked, as you say? So what are some of the common patterns that they haven't been doing, if you know what I mean? So what have you seen? They're the common mistakes in a way.
Yeah, look, on top of what I just gave you, if I was to sum down a good chunk of it, is we don't tend to normalize and discuss a comprehensive, integrated understanding of how we as humans work, right? And which is what realm theory gives us. But the next thing people say is, "Oh, where can I read a book on realm theory?" Well, you can't, right? And this is where it gets sort of counterintuitive to the mainstream of how we do things, which is, most of our knowledge and understanding is out here, right? You go to a seminar, what you're going to see? You're going to see somebody with 50 PowerPoints, crapping on in front of those, right? All the knowledge, particularly when it comes to human psychological functioning, mindset, all of this type of stuff, right? It's all the knowledge is placed out here, but it's all going on in here. It's all going on in my experience of life, moment to moment. The way you learn about these three key parts to understanding realm theory and it unfolding for you. The first is that life is an embedded experience, right? I've stopped reading books and listening to lots of podcasts because it's all going on in my life. And if I know how to tap into that, I can learn so much, So I need to look at life from what's going on within my experience, what's not going out. That was the mistake that got Bryn to his cliche midlife crisis at the age of 40, because everything I'd studied so far was outside of me. It wasn't, how am I working? Right? And then the next part is, how am I connected? We spend a lot of time trying to isolate things. If I asked you what is an expert, you'd be able to, most people would say, oh, it's somebody who knows a lot about a thing,
Mm,
right? But where do we have a similar name, i.e. expert, for somebody who's really good at connecting things up?
mm,
Because that's how organizations work. We may have the org chart, which comes down in a lovely pyramid, or we try and flatten it out to make ourselves feel better. But that's not how the organization functions. It has an end-to-end process. One of the most interesting parts of being a management consultant was doing end-to-end process work and seeing how the work flows through an organization,
mm,
right? And then finally, the other key point of what we need to do as a manager is we need to connect, what we refer to is connect to absolute zero, connect to
mm,
your being. We talked about earlier on.
mm.
If you can connect to that, then life will unfold for you. And then you will be able to understand and see life from a deep place of knowing, right? Not thinking about, not feeling about, not believing about, but from a place of knowing. When we can do that, then we just know what we need to do, right? And that goes for the same for an organization as a whole. A whole organization will have a 0 point, absolute 0 point, and it will need to understand its nature. Does that
Wow.
make sense? Or
Well,
is that a
I'm
bit
just
out
sitting
there?
here thinking, so many, and in fact, even this morning, I'm talking to a senior manager of a large organization, an engineering-based organization. We started my first main consulting project was with Telecom Australia. There was a team of consultants, 10 consultants, and our job was to change the culture of 90,000 people that had been PMG, Postmaster General, uh,
Yeah.
government employees so we're going to have to become more customer focused. These people don't even use the word customer, they use the word subscriber. The place has been designed and run by engineers. I didn't even
Hmm.
know what left brain and right brain was at that point, but you
Yeah.
start to hang out with organizations run by engineers, you soon start to learn what left brainers are. So I'm here
Yeah.
sitting listening to you, thinking from the point of view of so many organizations are run by either finance people,
Yep.
strong left brain people, or engineers, or technocrats of some kind or another. So you start saying to them, life is an embedded experience. We're all interconnected. The organization's a living entity. We want to now need to connect with absolute zero, your being. Some of those engineers will be going, what the hell? At one level, intellectually, as you say, the
Correct.
thinking part will be going, what the hell is he on about? And at an intuitive level, they're going, I agree. So
Yes.
there's, in
A
terms of their own
huge
internal
disconnect.
experience, yes. And yet these people are, particularly as you say, if they're living in the world of, I've got the knowledge. And again, many times I've been in organizations where the person who was the chartered accountant couldn't help but tell me, I'm a chartered accountant.
Oh yeah.
As if I'm supposed to actually get down on my knees and go, my God, I'm talking to a chartered accountant. Oh, they're geniuses because they've come through. And even then, you say this the same in law, the lawyers, I'm a
Yeah. Yeah.
lawyer.
Yeah.
And lawyers then go, what's your hourly rate? Because they're in their world, that it's the pecking order of
Oh yeah.
hourly
It's
rate.
pecking order in the hierarchy.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So you could never, as a consultant, charge a higher hourly rate than them because their paradigm just couldn't handle that. So here you are with this language and this thinking, I would imagine a decent number of the people coming to you are going to be big left brainers. How do you
Yep.
deal with them? How do you handle that situation?
Well, the reason why most people turn up to come and see us, and I alluded this to earlier, is
Mm,
because everything they've tried
mm,
logically and rationally, right,
mm,
they've
mm,
exhausted it and it's
mm,
still not happening, right?
mm,
And usually the bridge is burning, right?
mm,
And it's not uncommon for individuals, teams, and organizations to interact with us, right? And they kind of like what we have to say,
mm,
but it's also a bit scary, right?
mm,
And n- normally, what happens then is because, you know, you have your, like I said, you have your inside, your outside. We don't live in our internal world and we don't live in our external world. We live right in the space in between the two.
Mm,
That's
mm,
where a healthy life is.
mm,
Okay. Too much focus on the internal world and the outside world will begin to wind in on you because life is dynamic and it never stops and it never stops change. Right? You live too much with a focus on your external world and your internal world would wind in on you. Okay. And that's kind of a key thing. And so when you say, what do you do when people come? Right? Normally they have to have fallen off catastrophe bridge.
mm.
Now,
Yeah.
it sounds like a funny thing, but one of the key patterns, that we introduce people to, and we do, like our workshops are all, we use visual representations, we use very simple activities that cause people to reflect on what's going on for them in their experience, right? And one of the first things we have is the map, right? It's so simple, right? And it's got stick people on it and this, that, and the other. And the map shows us of how we deal with change, how we deal with loss, how we navigate our emotional landscape, where our emotional landscape is in relation to our thinking and our decision making and our behaviors and how they all thread together. And one of the key parts at the start of it is, if things change in life, which they do because it's dynamic and it never sits still. We like to think that, oh, when I get to this place it'll all be all right, but it's not.
Mm,
It's not. We're not point particles, we're strings. And things change, and that can come about through choice or no choice. And when no choice happens, you come off catastrophe bridge. And so that drop has got to be really big for people to come in here and finally go, shit, yeah, I think I might have to just put what I know, what I think I know, to one side, because my experience of life has become so, or experience of functioning or leading the organization has got to a point where it simply doesn't work. And if you reflect back into the story I told you at the start, I got to that place where careers imploding, relationships are imploding, and I had to acknowledge I don't know who I am and how I work. And so I would love it, Lee, if more people move towards insight earlier.
mm.
But an unfortunate characteristic of the way we as humans do things is we don't tend to move to what we deep down, because like you've acknowledged, engineers might be all left brain, rational, focused, but deep down the line, I know what you're talking about, Bryn.
Mm, mm,
They won't act on that deep knowing until the bridge is properly on fire and they're falling
mm,
off catastrophe bridge,
mm.
right?
Wow. You're reminding me
And
of
that's and that's the brutal truth. And it's sad.
yeah.
It's sad. Let's just take a moment, Lee.
Mm,
Let's just take a moment to acknowledge the sadness of that.
mm,
How many times, how many times am I in tea and coffee chats where people are like, I had to have a complete burnout
mm.
before I decided to change these significant things in my life. And it's
Yeah.
just sad.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm just saying there's a U2 song where somewhere along the line you've got to kiss, you've got to be on your knees before you start to look to the sky, or words to the effect that, as
Yeah.
you say, I'm literally broken. I can't, I've tried everything within my knowledge. I've read the books. Basically, I've done everything within my comfort zone on my
Yeah.
knowledge. But I think as far back as the Greeks, Aristotle, one of them said, the more I know, the more I realize I don't know. It that that
100%.
that there's this whole universe, in which again we talk about, which comes out of the Landmark Forum. There's what you know, there's what you know you don't know, but it's what you don't know you don't even know is where
Yeah.
that insight is. But
Yeah.
is your ego, and in fact, Buckminster Fuller talked about ego side. I literally have to almost disown everything, which is the point you made, all that knowledge, all that who I thought I was, to go, actually, I'm not actually who I thought I was. And I've spent
Yeah.
40 years crafting, creating, designing, dreaming that person. And what the hell? I'm not even that person. Now, that,
Yeah.
as you say, is an existential crisis. And it's like, what
Yeah.
the hell? Well, who am I? If that's not
Yeah.
the case, so as a
And
catastrophe bridge.
And a big, you talk about the existential crisis. One of the big things we do here is, and it comes as a byproduct, but we build resilience in people so that they build existential strength, right? Because, like we said, I used to think resilience was like a shield, right? But at some point, you're going to get tired, and that shield's going to drop, and you're going to get
Yeah.
whacked from what's behind it. Now, resistance to me is like a bamboo tree, right? Firmly rooted in the ground and able to flex and move with the storms. Because, like I keep saying, life is a dynamic, unfolding, non-stop thing that's happening, right? And so for me now, having spent time doing what I do, the first 3 years of my mentorship with Roz was not doing workshops and stuff. It was sitting in the workshops, taking the processes and the practices that we have to develop my own process and practice so I could understand this for myself. Note that in everything that I've talked about so far, I don't need to reference a book. I don't need to reference a podcast, because all I can do is talk about my experience, right? And that helps to connect, but it helps me to understand, right? Yeah. I just lost myself there. Where was I going?
That's okay. I'm interested then. I like to ask people, give me.
Sorry, wait a minute. It's the existential strength.
Yes,
It's
the
that
building resilience to get existential strength.
strength,
Yes.
because existential strength means that, there's shit happens in life, right? And if you don't think shit happens, you're mugging yourself. Any mindset coach or something like that that's selling you on the fact that you won't be touched by life and you'll all rise above it or something like that, that's just spiritual or emotional bypassing, right? Shit happens in life, and there's great moments and there's sad moments. There's profoundly sad moments and pain and all sorts of things go on, right? But can you be in it, right? Do you have the existential strength to know that come what may, no matter how dark it gets, and you will still be here tomorrow, right? And so that you can face some of the darkest moments, and you can fully absorb some of the brightest moments in your life and let them come and let them go, and not have to grab onto the great moments and drag them around like a trophy, or drag on to the old moment, the darker moments. And that to me is key resilience, is having that existential strength. There we go. I knew it.
Beautiful. Which comes back to, we straight away said bendable and flexible, coming back to books. Having done a master's degree at uni, Dimmicks became a client at one stage, and I used to sit in the business section or the personal development section while I was waiting for the chief exec to finish a meeting, and I ended up buying a ton of books over that at time. And one of them was the Lao Tzu, the way, and in there, one of them, he talks about, be bendable and flexible, as you say, like a reed, like a green twig, versus a dry old stick, because the dry old stick in the wind is going to break, versus staying green. And then the other, as you say, the Eastern philosophy is quite useful in terms of the life as a river. It's like it will flow on. It will keep flowing. There's birth, there's life, there's death, and it will keep flowing. Whereas you think, oh my God, today is the beginning, it's the end, it's all over. It's no. The sun will come up tomorrow, and the river will keep flowing.
Yes.
And
Remember that the bamboo analogy only works because it has roots in the ground, and those roots are in the ground is that existential strength. It knows who it is and what it is, and it's placed those roots in exactly the right place so that it can be in the storm and it can enjoy the winds, because the winds serve a purpose too. They blow the dead leaves away. And your river analogy as well there is great. Life keeps flowing, and we are living entities. And like, possibly just to double back into your your what happens if someone's an engineer and one of the sort of thought experiments I enjoy doing with them is saying, you know, if we brought a bicycle in here, if you and I were together and we brought a bicycle in here, we could take a bicycle apart, can't we?
Mm,
And then we can put it back together again and we can ride it, right? Because it's an inanimate object.
mm,
But if we brought a plant
mm,
or a dog in
mm,
or a human and tried
mm,
to take it apart and put it back together again, would it work? No, it
mm,
wouldn't,
mm,
because there's
mm,
a whole lot more going on because
mm,
it is
mm,
an animate object.
mm, mm,
And to
mm.
further the point, if you then go and have a, you know, go on a massive bike ride on that bike, at the end of it, which one of the two has adapted its muscles and structure as a result of the ride, and which one is still the same at the end of it? The bike
Mm,
is still the same, but we have adapted
mm,
because
mm,
we are living entities.
mm, mm,
Yet
mm,
we try to treat ourselves as inanimate objects.
mm,
You know,
mm.
if anybody goes and reads the current, who wrote the psychosocial hazard document,
Dunno, dunno.
there's one for workplaces at the moment as a
Mm,
department, and they've written all this stuff about the psychosocial hazards in the workplace. And it's
mm.
terrible if you read it because it's been written by a bunch of engineers who are trying to apply the same principles to
Yeah,
like an engineering
yeah,
physical thing of,
yeah,
you know, high loads or low loads or
yeah,
medium
yeah, yeah,
loads or
yeah,
something like
yeah,
that.
yeah,
They've
yeah.
applied that to the psychosocial world. They've applied the same principles, and it's terrible. It's a terrible document. It should just be put in the bin,
Uh,
right? Because you're trying to apply inanimate object thinking to animate living entities, right? I mean,
yeah,
let's be honest, right? If it, just to close this point out, if we're honest, right, the biggest psychosocial hazard to me, to most people in a workplace, is themselves.
mm, mm.
Because you'll treat yourself and talk to yourself way more shittier than anybody else will,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
consistently.
yes,
But we've
yes,
not
yes.
talked about that. Anyway,
Yeah, 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 yeah. Well, that's Maslow's what's Maslow's quote? If the only tool you have is a hammer, a lot of things look like nails. So you're an engineer. You look at the world using engineering principles, which is all very well if you're General Monash in World War One and you start to apply some
yeah, yeah, yeah.
science to war, but you start to apply engineering principles. And again, Taylorism when it comes to production lines, that's all very well. But when you start
Yeah.
talking psychology, you start talking emotional inner world well-being, then
So
it's
so
not.
this leads us this leads us in nicely to I'm just going to give us a quick bit of basic intro to realm theory, right?
Mhm.
It's because it's kind of like, well, yeah, but one thing applies, one what part of what you're saying is right, and a part of the thing is not, but it is, but it's not, and it can be
Mhm.
confusing. So realm theory shows us that there are basically three frames of reference that we're doing life and seeing life through, right? And think about it more by doing life through. You know, when people say to me, "Oh, I've done a lot of work on myself," it's like, well, try doing a lot of work in yourself.
Mhm.
That'll be more
Mhm.
beneficial,
It's like
right?
so I've worked on my biceps, therefore I worked on myself.
No, try
Mm.
working in yourself. How did you
Yeah.
improve the functionality of the biceps?
Mm.
Anyway, there's three frames of reference, right? The first one is here in everyday reality, right? We have form and substance, right? Which is our left brain engineering thinking.
Mm.
Right?
Mm. Mm.
Everything has form and it has
Mm.
substance, right? If
Mm.
I threw this at you, we were together, I threw this at you, Lee, it would hurt, right?
Mm.
So, you know, there's that consequence and it's here. That's the first sort of frame that we look through everything, right? And that's
Mm.
the most predominant one that we have. Okay. And in that frame, we have what goes on inside, outside, and in the space in between, right? And that can be arbitrary because my inside could be me and outside could be you. But if we're like hanging out together, we could be the inside and there's an outside. Anyway, that's the first one. The second one are like the hidden aspects of life, right? This is all the stuff I've been pointing towards today. You know,
Mm.
they're all
Mm.
the reasons why you can take a bicycle apart, but you can't take a human being apart, right?
Mm. Mm.
And that's because that's where we start to look at, we split out form and substance, right? So there's form without substance, which is the energy, which is the life force that flows through us, and there's substance that doesn't have any form. So that's like the pattern. So you talked about a river earlier on. You know, the only reason why the water flows like it does is because it has its bed and banks. We spend a lot of time in our everyday life looking at the energy of things without recognizing that the energy flows through something.
Mm.
And a large chunk of what we do at Wisdom in Your Life is look at the something that the energy flows through.
Mm.
Because as living entities, life's just trying to move through us, okay? But we make it so hard work because we clog up those patterns, right? And so a large amount of what we do here is help people to unclog those patterns. So you've got everyday reality, you have the hidden aspects of life, and then the last thing is time and space, right? It's moving all the time. So this is where, we have stuff that doesn't have time, doesn't have form and substance. It's like time, right? It's moving all the time. And, on one level in that every day, I can look at my clock and I know that, we'll have talked for an hour. But for you and me doing this podcast, this hour might feel like 20 minutes
Yeah.
or it might feel like 3 hours, right? And that's
Yeah.
where time can do this, right?
Yeah.
And we've all had that experience. So these these three frames help us to really see into the depths of life, and I'll probably just keep it there. But
Sure.
that gives us a real, and if you really want to go much, much further, then go watch the 2.5 hour bonanza with me and Ross, right?
Well, I'll do that. I'll do that. But
Yeah.
what I'd like to do is
Yeah.
give me at least one case study of a before and after, or someone's come to you, they've fallen off the catastrophe bridge, and you took them through a journey, and then 6 months later or 12 months later, what was the outcome? Can you think of a case study that
Yeah,
you would
sure.
say, that's a good, give
And
me a concrete example, gives the
yeah,
listener a
for
concrete
sure.
example of the before, during, and after?
Yeah, for sure. Do you want me to do it with an individual or with a company?
Probably, but I don't care, whichever one you want to do.
We'll go with an individual.
Ideally, it's some kind of measurable outcome that they can literally say, I can literally see or measure the difference that's happened.
Well, right. So by saying measurable,
Mm.
you want me to be able to put a figure against it, right?
If possible, if
Or
possible.
something, right? Whereas what I can probably do that with the individual I'm thinking of, but really everything has changed in their experience of and doing and being of life, right?
Okay.
Which is where things actually happen.
Mm,
Measurables are very useful
mm,
on one level, but they're limiting as well. But anyway, about this time last year, I was asked to go and do a quick strategy session with a group that does raises awareness about mental health and what you can do about it in the FIFO industry, right? So I turned up to the strategy day and I basically I applied some of our principles here of we're not going to talk about this. We're not going to have a rational talk. I'm going to tap into something a bit deeper. So I got them to do three simple things, right? Well, basically, I took some very simple like oil pastel, waxy crayons, and I got them to draw three pictures.
mm,
Right? I said, draw a picture of what is the impact that you have on your clients. How does this organization deliver that impact, and then the third one was draw what you do in the organization that delivers that. Now, by asking
mm,
someone to draw it, I'm taking them out their rational place and I'm taking them much deeper down into their knowing, right?
mm.
And it was quite funny. Well, I'll say funny, because within 15, 20 minutes, half the team was in tears.
Wow.
Right. And let's be clear, that's not a bad thing.
No, of course not. Of course,
That's an
yeah.
awesome thing, right? And
There's some
it,
insight going on. There's
to
paradigm
say,
shifting going on. There's
yeah.
a range of things happening. Yeah.
So it's starting to bring up what's really, really going on. And one in particular individual, he was like in floods of tears, and he was like, how did you do that? And I said, what? And he goes, how did you just tap that? And where are all these tears coming from? And I was
Mm,
like, well, only you really know. And
mm,
he then came to us, and we have three sort of foundational workshops which help people to really get to step one in their life. where they have a sense of knowing who they are and how they function. Because when we do that, then we go off and do some cool stuff. Right. So the first workshop with him was the MAP workshop, which I mentioned earlier on, where we looked at how do we actually navigate change, and how do you navigate your emotional landscape? Most of us don't know how to navigate our emotional landscape, which then closes up. If we have an emotional capacity that's this bigly, right? Our emotions should flow from one place to another, right? But we learn early on that some are acceptable and some are not.
Sure.
Anger's the first one. So then we end up building up all these layers within our emotional capacity, right? And stuff like, and so we need to keep it clean, right? And that's a big part of the MAP workshop, is actually giving people tools and practices that they experience in themselves so they can develop their own practice of how to keep it clean, right? And this is where I use the analogy of, you need to do the day-to-day stuff like brushing your teeth, and things like sleep, exercise, hanging out with your friends, nutrition will help that day-to-day stress. But let's recognize that we've all got layers and layers in the bottom. So sometimes, we need to go to the dentist and get the deep clean. So I worked with him to instill that, right? And so we worked on that practice. So he got used to moving through his emotional landscape, moving from change through his emotions into reflect, into understand, into making decisions, and then starting, new things as a result of that. So speeding up that, giving him a place to declog it, take out some of the deeper stuff that was getting in the way, give him more space to deal with life. It also brings a whole lot more joy and happiness back into life. But it also gives you opportunity to see more possibility and probability in your life. So following that, we then went to the next workshop. The first one's called the map. The second one's called the compass. The compass is how do we connect to that part of us that doesn't change through our entire life, right? It's where our deepest knowing comes from. It's our nature, What I'm about to say might sound pretty crass, but, I say it in most workshops. And your dad's little wiggler went into your mum's egg and created a spark. That spark is you, and that makes you unique. That makes Lee and Bryn and everyone, right? So what we look at in the compass is how do we connect to our nature, and then how do we allow our nature to connect to our physicality, our thinking, our emotions, our beliefs, the spaces we hang out in, the places we go to, and the people that we hang out with. Because some work for us and some don't. We're not homogenized, although we try to teach ourselves that. And so that can be quite a profound workshop. And then the third workshop, and so after that, I spent a lot of time with him, helping him to connect to his nature, to understand why some things really work for him and some things don't. Right. And so we started to connect into that. So now we've got two sets of practices working together, the one from the map and the one from the compass. And then with those installed, we were then able to do the final little workshop, which is our, so it's basically our repatterning workshop, which is where we go back and look at some of the shitty things that have happened to us, whether they can be, pretty dark or whatever, right? And it's not about whitewashing your personal history, but it's about acknowledging events, not going into them, not talking about them and reliving them, but acknowledging them, and then understanding how we have created patterns as a result of that, which are not ours. Defensive patterns that we've created over our lives, and these are the patterns that are usually winding in on us, that take us off catastrophe bridge, that bring us here in the first place, right? They're the little things of when we've had, difficult situations in our lives, particularly when we were young and we didn't have the help and advice, and we've had to leave a part of us in one place and the rest of us gets through, or we worked out how to get through in whatever way we did because we're still here. And then we keep repeating that, and then it shows up all across our lives. So what we look at there is how have these events created patterns and ways of being and doing that are not actually yours? And then we separate those from who you are. And then we go through some really simple, intuitive exercises to get rid of them.
Wow,
So
that's
that we don't keep repeating the same shit.
Yeah, repeating the same shit.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go to, as you say, even though the website right now, you might do some work on it. It starts. It's here at the wisdom,
Yeah.
the wisdom in your life. That's where you are. People want to start to look at those things, and start to look at some of the different workshops and services you have.
Yeah.
It sounds fascinating, mate. The thing about it is, I can see you and I are going to need to do another session.
Oh yeah, we're cracking. We're already at an hour already.
I know we're over an hour, which normally I try and say around that time. I know. So
I do apologise.
What we might do is I'm going to say all these other questions I want to get to. I'm going to leave it, and if I just look at my notes here, going back, I've got 3 pages of notes. The boarding school, which leading to the psych degree. You talked about that middle 80 to 90%, not the pathology, but what does good look like, which is essentially the world that the 80, 90%, as you say, we live in. I love that piece. Overthinkers are under-feelers. I mean, boy, I know quite a few of those, and that profound impact that Rosalind Schneider's had with you, and obviously the power of realm theory, and within me, building up and releasing of charge. They've used the term cleaning up, keeping it healthy, keeping that space almost between internal world and external world, connecting to absolute zero. We live in the space between internal and external world. The unseen and the seen, building resilience and, as you say, existential strength, being better at handling the shit that really does happen in life, and that very powerful. Why is it we have to get to falling off catastrophe bridge before we actually take action? It's just bizarre that human beings.
Yeah.
Like
some good notes you've got there, Lee.
Mate, I'm a good note taker.
You are.
Why some things work for you and why some things don't, and then the map, the compass, the repatterning workshop, mate. We've covered a ton. I'd love to do more. Is there anything that we haven't spoken about you'd like to cover before we wrap up?
I think this is what's coming up is, we've covered a lot, right? But I can go for hours more, right?
Yeah.
I'm so passionate about this because I'm just note in the middle of this conversation that I wanted to acknowledge the sadness, right? Because it is so sad, and we can all be doing life better, right? And it's not requiring that outside world to change and do it for us, right? And there's some simple stuff. And the thing that's sad is that everybody deep down knows what they need to do, right? So it's not, I've talked about these 3 workshops. It's not coming and like Bryn's telling you what to do. Like all I'm doing is connecting you to where you really know. And so, take your intuition and take yourself seriously, and treat yourself with, kindness, but also a priority. So I'll probably leave it there,
mate, because as you say, we can all be doing life better. And as you say, as far as we know, we only get one shot at this. So take advantage of the tools and the insights and the knowledge that's available, which is the very reason we do Leading Your Best Life. One, I want to be exposing people like yourself, exposing people to new thinking, new ways of doing things, and realizing, again, one of those books that came out of Dimmick's was The Inner Game of Golf and The Inner Game of Tennis. And they talk about performance equals potential minus interference. If you have 100 units of performance, 100 units of potential at 60 units of interference, if we can reduce that interference, which you're talking about in particular, negative patterns that we've sabotaged or we're stuffing ourselves up and we don't even know about it. We can take that 60 units down to 30 with the same amount of potential. We've now got doubled our performance through taking the handbrakes off, cleaning the shit up, as you say, doing the repatterning. So Bryn, let's do another one of these very soon, mate. But in the meantime, let's get this one out to people. And in the meantime, people can touch base with you. I'll put the links, the LinkedIn link and the website link in the notes.
If any of this has resonated, reach out. Like, yeah, it's like one of it's big stuff for people, but just reach out. You've heard who I am and how I talk, and I'm always open. The cost of the first chat is usually a cup of tea, and we go from there.
Very kind of. Well, a cup of tea, mate. That's very nice. Being British, I'm glad it's a cup of tea. English breakfast, mate. Thanks so much for today.
Thank you, Lee, for the opportunity.
I'll get this to you, and I'll see you very soon. And we'll do part 2 over the next month or so.
Indeed. All right. Take care.
Thanks, mate. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye-bye.